so much. Thank you. How's everyone? Hello. I want to thank Mark for hosting this symposium. It's pretty amazing when a big company like Ford actually takes time to be thoughtful and promote the exchange of ideas and collaboration. I think this started for me. I had no idea Ford was doing this or was thinking in this kind of way, but it started for me when I had dinner with Mark about 3 months ago, and he explained the vision of Ford, and I said, well, I have something to share. But what I want to share with you today, and I encourage you guys to all be part of this discussion, because I'm going to show a clip. I'm going to have a discussion with Jeremy Rifkin, and then after that, we're going to have a panel discussion, and I want to take Q&A from the audience. So if you've got pen and paper or a digital device, take a note, because I'd like to hear from you. First of all, I want to announce our newest featured documentary. It's called The Third Industrial Revolution, A New Story for the Human Family. We're going to show you, you're the first people that have ever seen the clip. It was just color corrected 3 days ago, so I haven't actually seen it. I saw it last night in rehearsal, so yeah, I saw it once. About a year ago, I had a chance encounter with the work of Jeremy Rifkin. It was on a satellite radio show. It was on the CBC in Canada, and he was on a panel, and all I caught was this debate that he was having where he documented and described a vision for 50 years, 2 generations of massive, massive employment. I'd never heard anyone talk so confidently of being able to create a new mass employment for the workforce. Then I realized, I started looking at his work and reading his work. He's written over 20 books. I realized not only does he talk about a vision, he's actually been planning this vision. So he's the architect of the Third Industrial Revolution plans in the European Union and in China, and I think he's going to tell you what he's been doing over there. But I just want to set up the clip. And the clip comes about 15 minutes into the film, and it's maybe the most important of the moment of the film, because it sets up the whole thesis. It describes basically what has happened over the last 200 years that has gotten us to this point, and then Jeremy will take us from there and show us what could happen in the next 50 years. So the doc begins with the following cards. The global economy is in crisis. Economists warn that we face another 20 years of declining productivity, slow growth, steep unemployment, and increasing inequality. The economic downturn is fueling growing discontent toward governing institutions and spawning extreme political movements all over the world. And now, after 200 years of industrial activity, scientists report that climate change is ravaging the planet, taking us into the 6th mass extinction event of life on Earth. So Jeremy asks the question, where do we go from here? Ladies and gentlemen, the film.
We need a new economic vision for the world. It has to be compelling. We need a game plan to deploy that vision, and it needs to be quick. It needs to move as quickly in the developing countries as in the industrialized nations. If we have any chance of arresting the worst of this climate change, we're going to have to be off carbon in 4 decades, everywhere. This is beyond anything we're talking about at global conferences. How do we begin to tackle something of this magnitude? We need to step back and reflect on how the great economic paradigm shifts in history occur. If we know how they occur, we're going to get a roadmap here in this room and around the world, and we're going to get a compass that will allow us to navigate a new journey, to completely transform the way we handle life on Earth. There have been at least 7 major economic paradigm shifts in history, and they're very interesting anthropologically because they share a common denominator. And that is, at a certain moment in time, 3 technologies emerge and converge to create what we call in engineering a general purpose technology platform. That's a fancy way of saying a new infrastructure that fundamentally changes the way we manage, power, and move economic life. What are those three technologies? First, new communication technologies to allow us to more efficiently manage our economic activity. Second, new sources of energy to allow us to more efficiently power our economic activity. And third, new modes of mobility, transportation and logistics, to allow us to more efficiently move the economic activity. So when communication revolutions join with new energy regimes and new modes of transportation, it does change the way we manage, power, and move economic life. It changes temporal spatial orientation. It changes our habitats. It allows us to integrate in larger units. It actually even changes consciousness and governance. Let me give you two examples. First Industrial Revolution, 19th century. Second Industrial Revolution, 20th century. The Brits took us into the First Industrial Revolution. And first, it was a communication revolution. They invented steam-powered printing. No more manual print presses. Steam-powered printing was a big leap forward because it allowed us to mass-produce very cheap print quickly. Then, in the second half of the 19th century, the Brits lay out a telegraph system across the British Isles. Steam-powered printing and the telegraph, those communication technologies then converged with a completely new source of energy in Britain called coal. But how were they going to take that coal and harvest it? They invented the steam engine. Now, this is ingenious. They figured out that they should put the steam engine on rails for locomotives, national transport, and logistics. Urban life, the Industrial Revolution, steam power. Second Industrial Revolution, the United States. Centralized electricity, and especially the telephone. I know we think the internet's a big deal, but the telephone was a really big deal. All of a sudden, people could communicate at vast distances at the speed of light. Later, radio and television. These communication technologies converged in the United States with a completely new energy source, cheap Texas oil. Then Henry Ford put everybody on the road with cars, buses, and trucks. Second Industrial Revolution changed the way we manage, power, and move economic life. That Second Industrial Revolution took us through the 20th century. It took the whole world through the 20th century, and it peaked in July 2008. In that month, Brent crude oil hit a record price of $147 on world markets. And when it hit that record price, the whole global economy shut down, silence, completely gone. That was the economic earthquake. The collapse of the financial market 60 days later was the aftershock.
Mayhem, carnage, a bloodbath. Call it what you want, but what we saw on global stock markets today was ill-disguised panic.
Our policy leaders are still dealing with the aftershock, not the earthquake. Why was it the earthquake? Because the entire industrial revolution that we've gone through is all dependent on the carbon deposits of a previous period in history. You know, if we look back, let's say that we make it through this next period of history. I always wonder, what will future generations think of us maybe in 100,000 years from now? And they'll say, oh yes, we remember them. There was the Bronze Age, the Iron Age. These were the fossil fuel people. They dug up the burial grounds of the Carboniferous era and created a short-lived, dramatic, and very dangerous civilization. Where do we head from here? Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you in Detroit. Let me start with an anecdote. I think it's instructive to the challenge in facing us in the next few years. When Angela Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first few weeks of her new government to help her address the question, how do we grow the German economy and create jobs on her watch? When I got to Berlin, the very first question I asked the new Chancellor is, Madam Chancellor, how do you grow the German economy when your businesses are plugged in to a second industrial revolution infrastructure of centralized telecommunication, fossil fuel nuclear power, internal combustion road, rail, water, and air mobility transport, and that infrastructure, it peaked in its productivity over 20 years ago. Many of you know there's a global debate around productivity. Why has it been declining for 20 years when we have all these new killer products coming out of Silicon Valley? Let me explain. We normally believe there are two factors in productivity: more capital for better machines and better performing workers. But actually, those two factors only account for about 14% of productivity. Where does the other 86% come from? There's another factor in productivity that's basically been ignored by economists for generations, even though the engineers and the chemists, they're very aware of it. Economics, we call this aggregate efficiency. Aggregate efficiency is the ratio of potential work to the actual useful work that actually gets embedded to every product and service as it moves across the value chain. Let me explain how it works. We take resources out of nature. It can be a rare earth for your smartphone, a metallic ore for an automobile, a fossil fuel. We take those energies and materials out of nature, and then we ship them, we store them, we produce goods and services from them, we consume them, we recycle them back to nature. That's our value chains. At every step of conversion of nature's resources through society back to nature, we have to embed energy and material into the product or service to get it to the next stage of what it becomes. But in that process of conversion, we lose some of the energy and the materials. That's aggregate efficiency. It works the same way in nature. In nature, if a lion chases down an antelope and kills it and devours it, only about 10 to 20% of the total energy in that antelope gets embedded into the lion. The rest is heat loss thermodynamically. It's in the conversion, you lose a lot of it. That's its aggregate efficiency. What does this have to do with my conversation with the Chancellor of Germany? She's a physicist by background, and I explained to her the following. In the United States, we started the Second Industrial Revolution in 1903 at 3% aggregate efficiency. 97% of all the conversions across the new industrial paradigm lost, wasted. By the 1990s, the United States got up to around 14% aggregate efficiency. 86% of every conversion lost. Germany got up to about 18.5% aggregate efficiency a decade later, and Japan led the world and got up to about 20% aggregate efficiency. Those were ceilings. Nothing's changed. And we now know that aggregate efficiency, when you market every year of the Industrial Revolution, makes up most of productivity. So here's what I said to the Chancellor. You can have market reforms. You can have labor reforms. You can have fiscal reforms. You can incentivize 1 million Steve Jobs and startup businesses. It won't make a damn bit of difference as long as your businesses are plugged in to a second industrial revolution infrastructure of centralized telecommunication, fossil fuel nuclear power, internal combustion road, rail, water, and air mobility, because that infrastructure peaked in its productivity, its aggregate efficiency, every industrial country in the world over the last 2 decades. There's no more new business opportunities to plug into that system. So on that first day with the Chancellor, we discussed a third industrial revolution, a new convergence of communication, energy, and transport to manage power and move Germany. At the end of the day, the Chancellor said, Mr. Rifkin, we will have this third industrial revolution for Germany. I'm going to report back in a few minutes what we've been doing in the last 10 years. We have a new convergence of communication, energy, and transport afoot. It's the digital revolution. The communication internet, which is digital, is now matured. It's been 25 years since the World Wide Web. Everybody here has their smartphone, and 3.5 billion people are connected. Within the next 20 years, everyone's going to be connected because China now has produced a smartphone for $25 with more computing power than sent our astronauts to the moon. So this digitalized communication internet is now converging with a nascent renewable energy internet, which in turn is converging with an automated GPS and soon driverless road, rail, water, and air mobility internet to create 3 internets, a super internet connected to manage, power, and move economic activity across the value chains of the world economy. These 3 internets ride on top of a platform called the Internet of Things. We're putting sensors in all our devices so they can monitor real-time economic activity and talk to each other and talk to us. We have 14 or 15 billion sensors already in place in the agricultural fields, in the factories, in the smart homes, in the smart vehicles, in the smart roads, in the smart warehouses. They're sending data. By 2030, we're going to have ubiquitous interconnectivity. We are creating a global brain, a prothesis of the central nervous system of the human race connected to the rest of the planet. So on the upside here, this planetary digital embrace, this interconnectivity, Internet of Things, communication, energy, and transport, it's a huge leap forward for humanity. Because now the human race can come together at very low cost and begin to engage each other, 7 billion people, directly, eliminating a lot of the middlemen and the vertically integrated organizations that were the referees and gave rise to the 1% and the 99%. Now we can directly engage each other in our great urban areas and rural areas, both economically and socially, at very small cost. And in doing that, we're going to have a vast expansion of social entrepreneurialism, a democratization of economic life. As exciting as this prospect is, we immediately are cornered by doubt. What about the dark side? When everybody's interconnected in a planetary embrace, how do we ensure network neutrality? How do we make sure that the network stays open so everyone has equal access? How do we make sure that governments don't purloin this for political ends, this Internet of Things, this third industrial revolution? That's already happening. How do we make sure that global companies, many of them internet companies, don't purloin this Internet of Things, monopolize it for commercial purposes for third parties? Already happening. How do we protect our privacy when we're all connected? How do we ensure our data when we're all connected? And how do we prevent cybercrime and cyber terrorism that could take down the system at a moment's notice? That's already happening. This is the dark net. And we're going to have to spend as much time and resources over the next 3 generations in building resiliency and redundancy into this system so that we can ensure it against breakdown and disruption. This is one of the great political struggles of the coming decades. But let's assume, for the sake of this afternoon, we're going to be able to address the dark net. And it's a heady proposition. Here is the opportunity of the bright net. Everyone in this room has a value chain, whether you're in a university, a cooperative, a small business, a big company. And you're managing, powering, and moving some form of your economic and social life every day. Here's the prospect, and that is you can go up on this Internet of Things already. It's emerging, this third industrial revolution, and you'll get a transparent picture of all the economic data going through society. Even big companies didn't have this data before. This evens the playing field so everyone is a player because you have access to the knowledge if it stays network neutral. Then you can go up, let's say you're a small and medium-sized enterprise here in Michigan, you go up on this Internet of Things platform that's emerging now in Europe and China where we're rolling this out, and you can take the information you care about on your value chain, that big data, and cut it out from the rest of the noise. Then you can mine your own big data with your own analytics, create your own algorithms and apps to dramatically increase your aggregate efficiency on your value chain, and by doing that, dramatically increase your productivity, dramatically plunge your ecological footprint, because in each conversion, you're getting more out of less of the earth and wasting less, and plunge your marginal cost. Some of the marginal costs brought on by digitalization of the communication internet have already moved to near zero marginal cost, and that's given birth to a completely new economic phenomenon. It's called a sharing economy. Capitalism's given birth to this little baby. It was not expected, and now it's flourishing alongside its capitalist parent. And let me say, as murky as this new system is, this is the first new economic system to enter onto the world stage since capitalism and socialism in the 19th century. This is a remarkable historical event. Already, we have seen the impact of zero marginal cost on the communication internet, which is the first of these three internets. So let's take a look what's happened with communication, and then we'll know what's going to happen with energy, mobility, transport, fabrication, manufacturing, and everything else. We've got 3.5 billion people on the internet now, and they are prosumers. They're still sellers, they're still buyers, they're still owners, and they're still workers, but they are prosumers. And right now, as we stand here today in Detroit, there's literally millions of young people, and they're producing their own music, open source, distributing across the worldwide internet at near zero marginal cost. They're producing their own YouTube videos, their own social blogs, their own news media. They're contributing to Wikipedia and reconstructing the knowledge of the world. Millions of young people are taking massive open online college courses taught by the best professors. They're getting credits, zero marginal cost. Entire industries have been disrupted in the 17 years since that little Napster file sharing service came online. And so the music industry, television, newspapers, magazines, book publishing, they've taken a hit. But thousands of new enterprises have emerged among the millennial generations doing the startups, not just Google, Facebook, and Twitter. Thousands of profit and nonprofit platforms, they're setting up the connections, the apps, the interconnectivity, they're mining the big data, all of you in this room. This is the digital revolution, you are the digital revolution. Well, we thought that there'd be a firewall here, and even though we can understand how zero marginal cost brought on by digitalization of communication would affect the virtual world, we just didn't think it'd move over to the physical world, the world of atoms. What I'm saying in the new book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society, is that Internet of Things breaks the firewall. It's the physical world now. We are connecting things so they can talk to each other. We now have millions of people right now, today, who are producing their own solar and wind electricity at near zero marginal cost this afternoon. We have millions of young people in car sharing services, and pretty soon those vehicles will be electric, they'll be fuel cell, they'll be powered by renewable energy at near zero marginal cost. They'll be 3D printed. The first cars are already here with recycled materials at low marginal cost. They're going to be driverless in 5 years with low labor marginal cost. We're plunging the marginal cost. Energy, transport, logistics. Let's go back to Germany. What's happened in the 10 years since my conversation with the Chancellor? We're now 33% of the electricity powering this great economy in Germany. It's solar and wind, zero marginal cost. We're heading to 100% renewable energy in Germany by 2040, zero marginal cost. And the interesting thing is the fixed cost. You know, solar and wind are on an exponential curve, just like computers. This is well known in Europe, but is not well known in America. When I was a little kid in the 1940s and 50s, there were only a few computers. First computer was at my university, University of Pennsylvania, where I teach at the Wharton School. But they cost millions of dollars, and the president of IBM at the time said, we will need maybe 5 computers for the world. That was an optimistic forecast. Then Intel came along with the computer chip, and they doubled the capacity and half the cost of the chip every 2 years, Moore's Law. Now, smartphone, $25. We have a similar curve going on for 20 years in solar and wind. A solar watt in 1978 cost $78. That's a fixed cost of 1 solar watt. You know what it is today? 53 cents. 35 cents in 18 months from now. It's plunging. And we now have power and utility companies in my global group in Europe and America who are buying long-term contracts, 20 years, for solar and wind at 4 cents a kilowatt hour. They're moving to parity. The fixed costs are going to be cheaper and cheaper. And the thing that you are not hearing about in America, that we know about in Europe, is that this is a sunset for fossil fuel and nuclear power. I meet with the power and utility companies in urban areas around the world, the CEOs every month, and the big question going on is stranded assets. Citigroup just reported last year $100 trillion in stranded assets in the fossil fuel industry now because solar and wind fixed costs are plunging. And this carbon bubble is going to make the subprime mortgage look like a tiny little parlor game. This is coming. And so there's great disruption going on in the energy industry, just like we saw in entertainment, news, knowledge, in the virtual world. Who's producing the new energy? Well, we have 4 major power companies in Germany: EnBW, RWE, E.ON, and Vattenfall. And I say we thought they were invincible 10 years ago. But what happened to these companies in 10 years is what happened to the music industry, in newspapers, and television, and magazines. Small players, and not just in the urban areas, the urban neighborhoods, but in the rural areas as well. Small players created electricity cooperatives, small businesses, neighborhood associations. They all got loans from the banks because the banks knew they would pay back by the energy they were generating. Nobody defaulted. They're producing all the energy. This is literally power to the people. Energy is being produced by small players in their homes, their offices, their factories, their sites all over Europe. The big 4 power companies, they're producing less than 7% of the new energy. They're out of the game in 10 years, but they're not necessarily out of business. What we say to them is you have to change your business model if you want to survive, just like we saw with the news, entertainment, and knowledge industries in the virtual realm. So we said, look, you power companies and energy companies, you're not leaving the second industrial revolution tomorrow morning. It's not either or, but you've got to make a 30-year transition here. So in the legacy power industry, you have to nurture it while you move the new third industrial revolution model in place. Does this make sense? Here's the new model. In the new model, you make more money as a power company by selling less and less electricity. Here's how you do it. You set up partnerships with thousands of enterprises, and you help manage the energy flowing through their value chains. You help them with their big data, their analytics. You help them create the algorithms, their apps, so that those thousands of enterprises can dramatically increase their aggregate efficiency across their value chain in every single conversion with their energy, dramatically increase their productivity, dramatically reduce their ecological footprint, and plunge their marginal cost. In return, those thousands of enterprises will share their productivity back with the power companies. It's called performance contracts. This year, 2 of the big 4 power companies took the model that we designed for them over half a decade ago, E.ON, RWE. In one case, they put their fossil fuel and nuclear business on the market and created energy services. In the other, they creating a legacy company with the old fossil fuel and nuclear, and the new energy services company is just emerged. This is not theory, this is practice in real time in Europe. But what's interesting is once you pay for the fixed costs of this energy in Germany, the marginal cost of producing solar and wind electricity, near zero. The sun has not sent us a bill. The wind has not invoiced us. It's free. Once you pay the fixed costs, and they're plunging. What happens when German businesses and European businesses plug into a third industrial revolution infrastructure, a 5G communication internet, managing a digitalized energy internet, and in every single conversion of every business, of every value chain, the energy they're using in their conversion, near free? How does a second industrial revolution country compete with that? And it's not just Germany. China. When President Xi and Premier Li came into office, Premier Li put out his official biography. I was stunned and surprised. He said up front he'd read my book, The Third Industrial Revolution. I never met him. And he instructed the central government of China to begin moving on the narratives that I'm outlining to you here today in Detroit. And boy, did they move fast. I've been shuttling back and forth with the leadership over the last several years, but to show you how fast they move, 11 weeks after my first visit to Beijing, the leadership announced an $82 billion 4-year commitment to digitalize the entire electricity grid of China, the biggest in the world, so that millions of Chinese people can install solar and wind on-site, urban and rural areas, and use the power off-site or send it back to the energy internet. That started this year. Watch the EU, watch China. Where's the US? The coming together of the communication internet with the digitalized energy internet gives rise to the automated, GPS, driverless, road, rail, water, and air mobility internet, and that's why we're here this afternoon. We built the entire second industrial revolution around making automobiles and selling automobiles. But now the millennial generation has thrown us a bit of a curve, because apparently you prefer access to mobility and car sharing networks, not necessarily ownership of vehicles in markets. Do I have this right? What's interesting is you go up on these car sharing websites, that's the communication internet, it immediately transfers you to the transportation mobility internet, GPS. GPS locates a driver within 90 seconds of the passenger, and PayPal pays. That's pretty convenient. But for every car shared, 10 to 15 cars are being eliminated. This is a revolution. Does this mean the end of the transportation industry? No, but they have to change the business model. They're still going to sell millions and millions and millions of vehicles over the next 40 years, for sure. But they also have to see the curve. As the millennials come of age and your children and grandchildren, there's going to be a mixed system, ownership and access, markets and networks. So the smart transport companies, they will continue to nurture their existing second industrial revolution model, buy to sell. They're going to sell a lot of vehicles. But they also have to move into the mobility internet and be able to provide mobility services. And this is what's going on right now. Many, many car companies are moving into mobility. Ford is right there in the leadership role. The automated vehicles are going to be coming out in the next 5 years. They're going to be electric. They're going to be fuel cell. They're going to be 3D printed. They're going to be recycled material. And they're going to take passengers from A to B. The automobile companies will keep some of their vehicles and not sell them and provide a service. And they'll come together with ICT, consumer electronics, logistics, and other industries, power and utility industries, and with blockchains help manage these networks with lots of players from the millennial generation. And they will help manage the logistics in the last mile with those automated vehicles so that shipment can get to you in real time with very little loss of efficiency. Because the big data is going to be able to tell you when to move, how fast to move, and how to get your products to where you want them to go. This is a revolution. The coming together of the communication internet, the renewable energy internet, the automated GPS and driverless transport, mobility internet, it changes urban life. The first industrial revolution gave us dense urban industrial life, public life. The second industrial revolution gave us metropolitan regions, suburban build-out, and a more private life where we separated where we live from where we work. The third industrial revolution gives us a nodal, interconnected life. Part of the day in our urban areas, we're going to be living in the virtual world, you already are. And part of the day in the physical world, you already are. And part of the day, we're going to be in the capitalist market, producing goods and services for a profit. But part of the day, you're going to be in the sharing economy, producing all sorts of virtual goods, your own energy, transport, and some of that's going to be free. Beyond the market and the sharing economy, you already are. This is the millennial revolution. It's right here in front of us. We just haven't mapped it out. How do we finance this? In Europe, I'm working with the European Commission since year 2000. We are finally rolling out a plan in February of 2017, what we call Smart Europe. We have a similar plan that we've been working on, I have with China, called Internet Plus China. That's already started this year. So the question was, how do we roll out an infrastructure revolution of this magnitude across Europe, Smart Europe, every region, every city? Where's the money? Well, we have the money. We just realized we weren't spending the money correctly. And the same in the United States. There's a big discussion going on now about an infrastructure revolution with the new incoming government. And how do we begin to move the infrastructure to create jobs? Well, we've got an idea of a different infrastructure revolution, not the old second industrial revolution, which is not going to take us forward, but a third industrial revolution so the millennials can now have their turn to remake the society. So what does this mean in terms of this third industrial revolution? In 2012, which was a lousy recession year in Europe, nonetheless, in that year, which is typical, we spent $741 billion equivalent US dollars on infrastructure. That's a normal year, a recession year. The problem's not the money, it's where we spent it. We spent all that infrastructure money on second industrial revolution, telecommunication, fossil fuel nuclear power, internal combustion transport, and we can't get any more productivity out of it. And we don't have the new business models that can bring the millennials into their period of history. So we said, let's reprioritize. Spend some of it on the second industrial revolution. We certainly don't want it to collapse. But spend a lot of it on building out roadmaps, if you will, in every major urban area and region of Europe over the next 20 years, starting this year, so that we can move the transition over 30 years from the second to the third industrial revolution. That's now going to start February 2017. Similar process in China, China Internet Plus. Every industry is involved in this build-out. Cable, telecom, ICT, power and utility companies, transportation, logistics, advanced fabrication, 3D manufacturing, construction, real estate. They're all involved in a 20 to 40 year build out. 20 years will just get us moving. 40 years we've built out the infrastructure. This means jobs. Millions of jobs, one last surge of mass employment to move us into a smart economy, smart world. We have 2 generations to bring back semi-skilled, skilled, and professional work. We have to take the United States, the entire energy infrastructure of this country has to be transformed in 4 decades from fossil fuel nuclear infrastructure to renewable energies, which are local and sited all over the country. Who's going to retrofit all the buildings? We cannot put renewable energy on site in our urban and rural areas unless the buildings are made efficient or else they leak. We have to retrofit millions of buildings. In Europe, we are retrofitting right now millions and millions of buildings. Robots aren't going to do that. AI doesn't do that. They don't put in the insulation and the new windows and the doors and the new efficiencies. Human beings have to do that. Unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled. And I know they're talking about bringing back jobs in the mining industry. My global group is doing development plans across Europe, and we're in northern industrial France, the old mining region now, 3rd largest region in France. We have trained thousands of miners, and they're now retrofitting buildings. They're not digging coal. And now we've got to put all those renewable energies online. Robots aren't going to assemble those wind turbines and assemble them. They're not going to put together the solar panels on the roofs. That's human beings. Then we have to take the entire electricity grid of the United States, which is dumb, servo-mechanical, falling apart. Every time there's a rainstorm, the power goes out. It's embarrassing. And we're going to have to put underground cable in to digitalize the electricity grid, to make it a renewable energy internet. Robots aren't going to do that. We have to install advanced meters and smart technology through all of our infrastructure to manage that energy internet. Human beings have to do that, millions of them. We have to take the entire transportation grid of the United States, which is dumb, road, rail, water, and air, and make it smart. Who's going to manufacture and install millions and millions of charging stations? Show you how fast China moves. They just announced they've taken the road from Shanghai to Beijing, and all that 1,300 kilometers has charging stations already. So this build out for 40 years requires a massive employment. And in terms of the skills, wake up America, the millennial generation's here, you have the skills, you're the internet generation. You grew up on these skills. We now need to put this to work on every level of society. Let me say why I'm really doing this. Although this is an economic plan, and what we say, and we have many global businesses across all of the industries working with us on this rollout across Europe and China. And when we meet with the heads of state and CEOs, we say to them, do you have another plan to address climate change, move the economy, create a just and sustainable future? Do you have another plan? If so, step forward. We get silence. Because the only other plan is to stay in a second industrial revolution, go back to dirty fossil fuels, no new employment opportunities for our young millennials, and we take us to real-time climate change. And this is why I think this is crucial, this plan. We are now in the 6th extinction event of life on Earth in real time, in the next 8 decades. And what's frightening about climate change is changing the water cycles of the Earth. That's what this is all about. For every 1 degree the temperature goes up on this planet from industrial emissions,
The atmosphere is taking up 7% more precipitation from the ground, so we're seeing a complete shift in the water cycles of the Earth over only 8 decades. More violent winter snows, more dramatic spring floods, more prolonged summer droughts and wildfires, more hurricanes and tsunamis and typhoons. We're destroying infrastructure and killing people already. And this is what you want to know if you're a young millennial starting a family. Our scientists tell us we're in the 6th extinction event of life. There's been 5 extinction events before we were ever here. We're now in the 6th, but this is moving faster than any extinction event in history. And our scientists tell us we could lose half the species of life on Earth in the next 9 decades. The last time this happened was 65 million years ago, and it didn't take decades, it took centuries. We are asleep with some greenwashing. This 3rd industrial revolution is common sense, it's smart, the technology's there, a millennial generation is ready to roll up the sleeves and make this happen, but we're going to have to push forward and not let this be pushed back in the United States of America, because then we lose a decade, but we may lose our planet, and we can't afford to do that. Last thought, it is not just about the technology. I'm not a Silicon Valley utopian, and I'm certainly not a determinist on technology. Technology only enables. Human beings determine the nature of the journey. We have to shift consciousness in one generation that separates you from your children. We need a new consciousness to accompany this new revolution, or we will not get there in time. And I guarantee you, you will live in a world you will not want to live in 2050. We need to get there in time. Here's why I'm guardedly hopeful, and see if this resonates with the millennials in this room. I'm guardedly hopeful because I'm beginning to see a change in consciousness among the millennial generation, and I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's here. You're beginning to change the way you think in 3 basic categories of consciousness. The way you think about freedom, the way you think about power, and the way you think about identity to community. Let's take freedom. My generation and generations before me, from the Enlightenment on, we think of freedom as the ability to be self-independent, be autonomous, be not beholden to others, be an island to ourselves. We're free to the extent we can make something of our life. So for us, freedom is exclusivity. But for a generation growing up on the internet, for you, freedom is the ability to flourish. And flourish means how many networks and communities you can engage in so you can optimize your experience on the planet. So for you, freedom is not exclusivity, it's inclusivity. It's not ownership, it's access. It's not necessarily markets, it's networks. Your freedom is lateral. And we're seeing a difference in power. We saw it with the Occupy movement. We older people think of power as a pyramid, top down, one to the multitudes. But when you grow up on the internet, power is of a different ilk, because the actual infrastructure of this Internet of Things platform is designed to be distributed, not centralized, like the first and second industrial revolution platform. It's designed to be open and collaborative, open source, not closed and proprietary, like the first and second industrial revolution platforms. It's designed to be transparent, and it laterally scales, where millions of small players come together and create vast networks. You provide the talent, the network benefits, your social capital rises. Do I have this right? That's a revolution. Lastly, we are seeing a shift in the notion of identity. This is really crucial. I grew up in a post-Westphalian geopolitical world. Every individual is a sovereign. We compete with every other individual around the world for scarce resources in the marketplace, zero-sum game. Our nation states are sovereign. They represent the individual citizens, and their responsibility is to compete with other nation states for scarce resources in the marketplace and on the battlefield. I remind you, we fought 2 world wars, largely around coal and then oil. Millions of people died. Can anybody here tell me how we address climate change, bring the human family together, steward our fellow creatures with that geopolitical worldview? And that's what's prevailing now with many of these political movements emerging all over the world. We have young people coming home with biosphere consciousness, millennials, not geopolitical consciousness. And that biosphere is interesting. It's a tiny little sheath. It's only 19 kilometers. From the stratosphere to the ocean, where all of life and the chemicals of the planet maintain the beauty of this biological oasis in the universe. We've got young millennials coming home and they're saying, why is Dad using so much water all the time when he's shaving? We're wasting that precious water. Why is the electricity on that TV for 3 weeks? We haven't been in that room for 3 weeks, wasting the electricity. Why 2 cars? Why not have 1 car and then car share one on a mobility network? And here's the one that I'm particularly fond of, and it brings a smile to me. We've got a lot of millennials questioning where the hamburger comes from on the plate. They're asking, did that hamburger come from a rainforest? Did they have to destroy the trees for 6 little inches of topsoil to graze that cow for 1 bite of that burger? And the millennials understand when you destroy those trees, there's wild animal life that only live there, they go extinct. And if the trees are no longer there to graze the cow for the hamburger, there's no trees to absorb CO2 from industrial emissions, the temperature of the planet goes up because of the hamburger. And that means some farmer on a subsistence farm can't feed her children because she's getting spring floods, summer droughts, and wildfire because of the hamburger. The millennials are learning about ecological footprint. You can measure it. Everything we do every day intimately affects some other human being, some other creature, the ecosystems in which we live, the biosphere community. A millennial generation is beginning to believe this is not a geopolitical world we each compete with each other for a zero-sum game. This is a biosphere world where everybody's individual well-being intimately depends on the well-being of every other creature in the biosphere in which we live. That is our indivisible community. There's no escape. Climate change has taught us a cruel lesson. There is no escape. Doesn't make any difference how rich you are. There is no escape. So here's my plea. The second industrial revolution started here in Detroit when Henry Ford started putting out those cheap cars. We had Edison gave us the electricity grid, and Alexander Graham Bell gave us the communication network, and Henry Ford gave us those cars off the assembly line. Now it's time for Detroit and Michigan and the old Rust Belt Midwest. It's time for the millennials to step forward for a third industrial revolution so that we can lay out this infrastructure across these regions. 5G communication, renewable energy internet, automated GPS mobility internet on top of an Internet of Things. We can begin to create the new businesses, the new jobs, the new opportunities of a 21st century. This is the agenda for a millennial generation. This is the digital revolution. And why not start here, at the very point where the second industrial revolution started nearly 100 years ago? Tomorrow morning here, start the third industrial revolution. Let it roll out from Detroit across the Americas. We're already there in Europe. China's there. If we really want to join a new partnership and collaboration, let's make it happen. This is ground zero, Detroit. Thank you.